The wind howled through the darkened streets of Anchorage, rattling the windows of my truck as I pulled into our driveway. The snowstorm had rolled in faster than expected, thick flakes swirling in the air like ash from some unseen fire. I killed the engine, gripping the steering wheel, trying to force my mind to settle. But it was impossible. Not after what I had just seen. Lauren's phone had lit up at the exact wrong moment, just as she was laughing at some mindless show on Netflix. The name flashed across the screen, stark against the dim glow of our living room. Ethan. A simple message. Can't stop thinking about last night. For a second, I thought my heart had stopped. Then it thundered back to life, pounding in my chest as my blood turned to ice. I had stared at the message long enough for it to disappear, for the screen to dim, leaving nothing but the reflection of my own stunned face staring back at me. I should have said something. I should have called her out on the spot, demanded an explanation, forced her to stumble over a lie she wasn't ready to tell. But instead, I had sat there, frozen in place, my stomach twisting into knots as she glanced at me, blissfully unaware that her world was about to shatter. Now, sitting in my truck, I forced myself to breathe. Deep, slow, controlled. I couldn't lose it. Not yet. I needed proof. Real proof. Not just a name on a screen. Not just my gut screaming at me that something was wrong. Reaching into my jacket pocket, I pulled out my phone. My fingers felt numb, stiff from the cold, and the rage building beneath my skin. I opened my messages, heart hammering as I stared at the anonymous text I had received an hour ago. You don't know me, but you need to check your wife's text with Ethan. I'm sorry. I hadn't recognized the number. Had no idea who had sent it. But whoever it was, they weren't lying. I exited the truck, my boots crunching over the frozen driveway. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. My thoughts were a tangled mess, a storm just as violent as the one raging in the sky above me. I had trusted her. For years. Through the long winters. Through the nights she claimed to be working late. Through every little moment that now felt like a lie. The front door creaked as I stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me, but it didn't chase away the chill spreading through my chest. Lauren was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up, smiling, completely unaware of the war inside me. Hey, you're home early, she said, taking a slow sip. Everything okay? I studied her, watching for the cracks, the flickers of guilt, the hesitation. But she was smooth, too smooth. I forced myself to nod, shrugging off my jacket. Yeah, just didn't feel like staying out. She tilted her head, curious, but didn't press. She never did, because she had no reason to suspect that I knew. Not yet. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone still clutched in my hand. My grip was so tight my knuckles ached. How was your day? I asked, my voice level, betraying none of the chaos inside me. She smiled, leaning against the counter. Same as always. Work was exhausting, and I swear traffic's getting worse every day. She rolled her eyes, as if the universe had personally conspired against her. Oh, and guess what? Katie finally quit. Can you believe it? She just walked out. I nodded absently, barely hearing her. My mind was somewhere else. Replaying the message. Replaying the name that had burned itself into my memory. Ethan. I took a slow breath. You going in tomorrow? She hesitated, just for a second. Yeah. Early meeting. I nodded again, barely able to contain the cold amusement creeping into my bones. She was still lying. Still pretending. I glanced at her phone on the counter, face down, as if she were hiding it in plain sight. If I reached for it, she'd snatch it away. She'd spin some excuse, laugh it off, call me paranoid. But I didn't need her phone. I had the bill, the records, the proof. And soon, I'd have my revenge. The next morning, I was up before dawn. Lauren was still asleep, curled under the thick blankets, her breathing slow and even. I watched her for a moment, studying the way the dim light from the hallway outlined her face. A face I had once trusted without question. Slipping out of bed, I moved silently down the hall to my office. I powered up my laptop, my fingers steady despite the storm raging inside me. I logged into our phone provider's website, entered the password, and pulled up the call and text records. The name Ethan stood out like a beacon in the dark. Dozens of messages, late-night calls, lunchtime conversations. Some lasted minutes, some stretched for hours. The evidence was undeniable. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep going. Clicking on the GPS tracking feature linked to her phone, I waited for the data to load. Within seconds, the map pinpointed her most frequent locations. Home, work, the grocery store, and then a fourth location. A small cabin nestled deep in the woods outside Anchorage. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The cabin wasn't ours. It wasn't anywhere Lauren had mentioned before. And yet, she had been there. Repeatedly. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. I finally had the proof I needed. Now, it was time to make my move. I spent the next few days pretending. Pretending I was the same man who kissed Lauren before work, who laughed at her stories over dinner. But every touch, every look, every moment was calculated. I was watching her, studying her, waiting for her next move. And she had no idea. One evening, she was in the shower when I saw my chance. Her phone was lying face down on the kitchen counter, unguarded. I picked it up, heart hammering. The lock screen flashed. One new message from Ethan. I tapped the notification, but the phone demanded a passcode. Of course, she wasn't that careless. But she had made a mistake. Just seeing the sender's name was enough. The message preview read, "Same time tomorrow?" I set the phone down exactly as I had found it, then turned to pour myself a drink. My fingers were steady now. The rage that had once burned so fiercely was now cold, controlled. She thought she was untouchable, that I was too blind, too trusting to ever question her. Tomorrow, she would go to that cabin again. And this time, I would be waiting. The next morning, I left before she did. I had already memorized the route. The roads leading out of Anchorage were covered in ice, but I knew them well. I drove past towering pines and stretches of snow-covered wilderness until I reached the turnoff. The cabin was hidden behind thick trees, its roof barely visible through the heavy snowfall. I pulled off the road and killed the engine, my breath clouding in the freezing air. Now, I just had to wait. It didn't take long. An hour later, her car appeared in the distance, winding down the same path. My pulse quickened as she pulled up in front of the cabin, parked, and stepped out. She looked around, cautious. She didn't suspect a thing. She knocked once. The door opened. Ethan. I recognized him instantly, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky smirk that made my fists clench. He pulled her inside, closing the door behind them. I waited a few minutes, letting them settle in. Then, I got out of my truck and moved forward, careful to keep to the trees. The snow muffled my steps. I reached the cabin and pressed myself against the wall, listening. Laughter. Low voices. Then, something that made my stomach turn. Her voice, soft, playful. The way she used to sound with me. My hands curled into fists. I could end this right now. Kick the door in. Drag them both out into the cold. But that would be too easy. No, I had something better in mind. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. With a few swipes, I opened the app connected to the hidden camera I had planted on the cabin's porch the night before. A live feed appeared on my screen. Every word, every touch, every betrayal. I was recording it all. Lauren had no idea, but she had just sealed her fate. I didn't move from my position by the cabin wall. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. My heart was steady, my breath controlled. I had waited for this moment, and now I had everything I needed. Inside, Lauren and Ethan had no idea they were being watched. I could hear their voices, muffled by the wooden walls, their laughter low and intimate. The sight of them together on my phone's screen sent a wave of ice through my veins. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't the time for anger. I had to think clearly. Losing control wouldn't get me what I wanted. And what I wanted was more than revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted to make sure that when I finally confronted Lauren, she had no way out. No excuses, no lies. Just the raw, undeniable truth. And so I waited. I recorded everything. The way she touched him, the way she looked at him, the way she kissed him. She never kissed me like that anymore. A bitter smirk curled at my lips. Let her have her moment. Because soon, I would take everything from her. It was another 30 minutes before Lauren finally left the cabin. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching as she walked to her car. "You sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying through the crisp morning air. Lauren laughed, shaking her head. "Alex, please. He's clueless." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. "Clueless? You'll see just how clueless I am soon enough." She leaned up, kissing him one last time before slipping into her car and driving away. Ethan stood there for a moment, stretching, before finally stepping back inside. I exhaled slowly. Now it was time for phase 2. I waited until the next day. Patience was key. I needed Lauren to think that everything was normal. When she got home that evening, she was all smiles, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. "Hey, babe," she greeted me, kissing my cheek. "How was your day?" I forced a small smile. "Same as always." She nodded, pulling out a bottle of wine. "Mind if I have a glass?" I shook my head. "Go ahead." She poured herself a generous serving, taking a long sip before leaning against the counter. For a moment, I just watched her. She looked so at ease, so comfortable in the lie she was living. It almost amused me. Almost. "I was thinking," I said, keeping my voice casual, "maybe we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us." Her eyes flickered with something. Hesitation? Guilt? She covered it quickly, smiling. "That sounds amazing. We haven't had time for just us in a while." Liar. She was going to say yes, of course, because she thought she had me wrapped around her finger. "Great," I said. "I'll book a cabin." Her smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back. "A cabin?" I nodded. "Yeah, thought it'd be nice to get away from everything. Somewhere remote. Just you and me." She hesitated again. She didn't want to go to a cabin, because that was their place. But she couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. So, she forced a laugh. "That sounds perfect." I took a sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch between us. She had no idea I was leading her into her own trap. The next day, I made another move. I went to Ethan's workplace. It was a small mechanic shop on the outskirts of town, nothing special. Ethan was outside, talking to a coworker. He didn't notice me at first. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward him, my movements slow and deliberate. His coworker noticed me first, nudging Ethan. Ethan turned, his brows furrowing. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "Yeah, actually. I need some work done on my truck." He crossed his arms. "What kind of work?" I shrugged. "Nothing major. Just a checkup. Figured I'd stop by and see if this place was any good." He studied me for a moment. "You from around here?" I nodded. "Yeah. Lived in Anchorage my whole life." Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, maybe. "All right," he said. "Bring it in tomorrow. We'll take a look." I nodded. "Sounds good." I turned to leave, but before I did, I glanced back at him. "By the way," I said casually, "you look familiar. Do you go up to the woods much?" He tensed, just for a second. I caught it. "Nah," he said quickly. "Not really." Liar. I smirked. Huh. Must have been someone else then. And with that, I walked away. That night, I finalized my plan. Lauren thought we were going on a romantic getaway. Ethan thought I was just another customer. They had no idea that in a matter of days, their whole world would collapse around them. Because I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to destroy them. The air was crisp and biting as I drove up the icy road leading into the remote outskirts of Anchorage. Snow blanketed the landscape, untouched and undisturbed, except for the narrow tire tracks my truck left behind. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that warned of an impending storm. Lauren was in the passenger seat, bundled in her thick coat, humming softly to the radio. She had no idea what was about to happen. She thought this was a romantic getaway. She thought I was still the clueless husband who didn't suspect a thing. But this was far from a vacation. This was her reckoning. 2 days earlier, I had made sure all the pieces were in place. The cabin was remote, deep in the woods, with no cell reception and no way to call for help. It was the perfect trap. Lauren had hesitated when I suggested this trip, but she couldn't refuse without making me suspicious. So she had smiled, acted excited, and packed a bag like the devoted wife she pretended to be. The act was almost convincing. But I wasn't fooled. I had spent the last few days ensuring Ethan was too distracted to contact her. His shop had been hit with an inspection after an anonymous tip about illegal modifications on certain vehicles. He was dealing with that mess now, scrambling to save his reputation. Meanwhile, Lauren thought she was slipping away for a carefree weekend with her naive husband. She had no idea I had already turned the tables. As we reached the cabin, I pulled the truck into the driveway and shut off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, save for the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. Lauren smiled at me, rubbing her hands together. "This is beautiful," she said. "Secluded, peaceful, exactly what we needed." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just us." She had no clue how true that was. I grabbed the bags from the truck and led the way inside. The cabin smelled of fresh wood and pine, a fireplace set neatly in the corner, though the air inside was freezing. "Wow," Lauren breathed. stepping inside and looking around. You really outdid yourself. I set the bags down and watched her. I waited for her to check her phone, to send a message to Ethan, to make sure the plan she thought she was in control of was still in motion. But her phone had no signal. She frowned, looking at the screen. Ugh, no service out here. I shrugged. We're in the middle of nowhere, Lauren. That's kind of the point. She let out a forced laugh, shoving her phone back into her pocket. Yeah, I guess. I stepped closer, watching her carefully. You seem tense. She blinked, caught off guard. What? No, I'm fine. I tilted my head. Are you sure? You seem distracted. Her smile faltered for just a second. Then she covered it with a laugh, reaching for my hand. Come on, let's start a fire. I could use some warmth. I held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding. Yeah, let's warm things up. She didn't realize I wasn't talking about the fire. As night fell, the storm picked up outside, heavy snowflakes crashing against the windows. The wind howled, rattling the cabin. Lauren sat on the couch, sipping a glass of wine, her legs curled beneath her. She looked relaxed. I sat across from her, watching, waiting. Alex, she said suddenly, tilting her head. What's on your mind? I smirked. You. She laughed softly. That's sweet. I took a slow sip of my drink. Tell me something, Lauren. She raised an eyebrow. What? I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locked onto hers. How long have you been fucking Ethan? The blood drained from her face so fast, it was almost comical. She blinked, lips parting, but no words came out. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and suffocating. Then, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The video started. The recording from the cabin. Ethan's voice. Lauren's laugh. Their kisses. Their whispers. Every single betrayal, laid out in cold, undeniable truth. Lauren's breath hitched. Her eyes widened in pure panic. Alex, she stammered. Shut up, I said calmly. Just shut up. She swallowed, eyes darting to the door, as if debating whether she could run. I laughed. Go ahead. Try. Where will you go? We're miles from anything. No phone. No car keys. Just you and me. Tears welled in her eyes. Please, let me explain. I leaned back, watching her squirm. Oh, by all means, Lauren. Explain. She trembled, gripping the couch cushion. It didn't mean anything. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because Ethan sure seemed to enjoy himself. She flinched. It was a mistake. I tilted my head. No. A mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove. A mistake is missing an exit on the highway. I stood up, towering over her. What you did was a choice. She started crying, shoulders shaking. I love you, Alex. I laughed coldly. No, you don't. You love lying. You love sneaking around. You love thinking you're smarter than me. She shook her head violently. No, that's not true. A knock at the door cut her off. Lauren froze. My smirk grew. Expecting someone? I asked, stepping toward the door. She shook her head frantically, but her eyes told a different story. I pulled the door open, and there stood Ethan. His face paled when he saw me. I smiled. Oh, good. You're just in time. Ethan stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his jacket, his face twisted in confusion and hesitation. He hadn't expected me to be here. That much was obvious. Lauren gasped behind me, her breath hitching in her throat. She was trapped now, cornered between the man she had betrayed and the man she had betrayed me with. I smiled coldly. Oh, good. You're just in time. Ethan's eyes darted between me and Lauren. Alex, what's going on? I stepped aside, motioning toward Lauren. Why don't you ask her? Lauren shot me a desperate look, but I didn't care. Let her scramble. Let her try to spin another lie. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, why are you here? Ethan frowned, glancing at me again, then back at her. You texted me. Lauren's face drained of color. I didn't. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. Oh, you didn't? I'm used. That's funny, because I used your phone to send him a message about an emergency. Thought he'd like to know what was really going on. Ethan stiffened. What the hell, man? I smirked. Oh, come on, Ethan. Don't act like the victim. You've been screwing my wife. Did you really think this was going to end well for you? He clenched his jaw. I didn't. Lauren suddenly lunged toward me, reaching for my phone. I dodged easily, grabbing her wrist and twisting it just enough to make her wince. You don't get to control the story anymore, Lauren. It's my turn. Her breathing was ragged, her body trembling. Alex, please. Let's talk. I laughed, shaking my head. Oh, now you want to talk? Now that you're cornered? Ethan took a cautious step forward, fists clenched. Let her go, man. I released Lauren abruptly, making her stumble back. Fine. You want her? I gestured toward her. Take her. But first, I think you both should know something. Lauren looked terrified. Alex, don't. I ignored her. My smirk widened as I pulled out another phone, one Ethan didn't recognize. I unlocked the screen and pulled up a different set of messages. Messages between Lauren and another man. Ethan's face twisted in confusion. What is this? I handed him the phone. You thought you were the only one? Guess again. His eyes scanned the screen, his face paling with every word. I could see the moment realization dawned on him. The moment he understood he wasn't just my enemy. He was her fool, too. Lauren's lips parted in horror. Alex, where did you? I cut her off. You're not as smart as you think you are, Lauren. You left this little burner phone in the car the other night. Guess curiosity got the better of me. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. You said I was the only one, he whispered. Lauren shook her head frantically. Ethan, listen to me, His hand lashed out, grabbing her arm. Who the hell is Ryan? Lauren froze. I grinned. Ethan turned toward me, his face twisted in rage. How long? I shrugged. I don't know. Months? A year? Doesn't really matter, does it? He spun back to Lauren. Answer me. She burst into tears, shaking her head. It wasn't serious. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shoving the phone back into my hand. You played me, he muttered. You used me just like you used him. Lauren reached for him. No. Ethan, don't say that. I love you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, that's original. Ethan stepped back, staring at her like she was a stranger. You're unbelievable. Lauren turned toward me, eyes wild with desperation. Alex, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I smiled. The final nail in the coffin. Oh, I'm not doing anything, Lauren. You did this to yourself. And then, I tossed her the keys. Her brow furrowed. What? I nodded toward the door. Get out. She hesitated. Alex, it's freezing outside, I grabbed my coat, opening the door wide. The wind howled, snow whipping into the cabin. Then I'd hurry if I were you. Lauren looked at Ethan, pleading. But he shook his head. I'm done. Tears streamed down her face as she turned back to me. You're really doing this? I shrugged. Actions have consequences. She hesitated a second longer, then grabbed her coat and ran. I watched as she disappeared into the snow, her figure swallowed by the storm. Ethan exhaled slowly. Jesus. I turned to him. Guess you're walking home, too. He scoffed. You serious? I smiled. Dead serious. Ethan shook his head, muttering curses under his breath, before stomping toward the door. He didn't look back as he disappeared into the storm. And just like that, they were both gone. I closed the door, locking it behind me. The cabin was silent now. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I had won. The storm raged outside, snow pounding against the cabin windows like an angry beast trying to break in. But inside, there was only silence. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the door Lauren and Ethan had just walked out of. The cold draft from the open doorway had already begun to fade, replaced by the warmth of the crackling fire. I had expected satisfaction. I had expected relief. Instead, I felt nothing. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the counter, and poured myself a drink. The amber liquid burned as it went down, but it didn't dull the emptiness settling in my chest. Lauren was gone. Ethan was gone. And now, I was alone. For months, I had been consumed by my plan, watching, waiting, carefully orchestrating every move until I had them both exactly where I wanted them. But now that it was over, I couldn't shake the question gnawing at the back of my mind. What now? I sat by the fire for nearly an hour, lost in thought, until a noise outside broke through the quiet. A car engine. I frowned, standing up. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of a storm? I grabbed my coat, stepping to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. A pair of headlights cut through the snow, illuminating the swirling white abyss outside. A dark SUV sat at the end of the driveway, engine running. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. I reached for the gun I kept tucked under the couch, a habit I had picked up long before this mess with Lauren had started. Just as I checked the safety, a knock echoed through the cabin. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. I moved toward the door, my steps measured, my grip tightening on the gun. The storm outside roared as I cracked it open just enough to see. A man stood on the porch, his face partially hidden beneath the hood of a heavy coat. Snow clung to his shoulders, his breath visible in the freezing air. Alex Cooper? His voice was calm. Too calm. I didn't answer. Instead, I studied him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of quiet confidence. Not a lost traveler. Not someone who had gotten stuck in the storm. He was here for me. Who's asking? I said evenly. The man pulled back his hood, revealing sharp blue eyes and a strong jaw. He looked like someone who had seen things, someone who had been on the other side of violence more than once. My name's Ryan. The name hit me like a bullet. Ryan. Lauren's other man. I didn't react, but inside, a storm far worse than the one outside was brewing. She told you about me, didn't she? Ryan smirked slightly, tilting his head. Bet she left that part out. I kept my face blank. Can't say I'm surprised. Ryan chuckled. Yeah, well, she's got a habit of leaving out important details. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my gun out of sight, but ready. So what do you want, Ryan? His smirk faded. We need to talk. I think I'm done talking about Lauren. Ryan nodded slowly. Yeah? Well, I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say. He reached into his coat pocket, and I tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a flash drive. He held it out. This is everything. I didn't take it. Everything what? Ryan exhaled, stepping closer. Lauren, Ethan, and something much bigger than an affair. I narrowed my eyes. What the hell was he talking about? Ryan dropped the flash drive on the porch. You want the truth? It's all in there. He stepped back toward his SUV, opening the driver's door. I'd check it soon. You're in deeper than you think, Alex. Before I could respond, he climbed into the vehicle, slammed the door shut, and backed down the driveway, disappearing into the storm. I stood there, staring after him, my pulse pounding. What the hell just happened? I took the flash drive inside, tossing it onto the coffee table. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I even wanted to know. Lauren was gone. Ethan was gone. Wasn't that enough? But something gnawed at me. Why would Ryan come all the way out here, in the middle of a blizzard, just to hand me this? Slowly, I moved to my laptop, plugged the drive in, and opened the only file inside. A series of images and documents filled the screen. I clicked on the first video. The footage was grainy but clear enough to make my stomach drop. Lauren, Ethan, and another man. Not Ryan. Someone else entirely. I clicked on another file, a bank statement. Lauren's name was on the account. A large deposit. Thousands of dollars. I scrolled through more files, my chest tightening with every click. Lauren hadn't just been cheating. She had been working with someone. I clicked on the final video, and my blood ran ice cold. It was a security camera feed. The timestamp was recent, only 2 weeks ago. Lauren sat in a dimly lit room, across from a man in a suit. And then I heard her voice. He doesn't suspect a thing, she said. The man nodded. Good. We'll handle him soon. My own wife had been planning something against me. The realization hit me like a freight train. Lauren's betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. And now, I was in the middle of something far bigger and more dangerous than just an affair. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, the video looping in my mind like a sick joke. Lauren, sitting across from a man in a suit, talking about me. He doesn't suspect a thing. Good. We'll handle him soon. Every muscle in my body tensed. The weight of what I was seeing, what I was hearing, pressed down on me like a vice. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a setup. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Lauren was gone, but that didn't mean I was safe. The man in the video, who the hell was he? And what did he mean by handle me? I clicked through more files, scanning documents, photos, transaction records. My heart pounded as I pieced it together. Lauren had been transferring money for months. The deposits, large sums, withdrawn in cash, led back to an offshore account under a fake business name. It wasn't hers. It belonged to the man in the video. And then I found it. A police report, filed just over a year ago. A man named Derek Henshaw, a former hedge fund manager, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The last person he was seen with? Lauren. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Lauren wasn't just a liar. She was dangerous. I snapped my laptop shut and grabbed my phone, my mind racing. Who could I trust? The cops? No. If Lauren had gotten away with whatever she had done before, she probably had connections. Ryan. He was the only other person who seemed to know what was going on. I scrolled to the last incoming call and dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. I clenched my jaw. What the hell is this, Ryan? He sighed. It's a mess, is what it is. And you're in the middle of it. I gritted my teeth. Start talking. Ryan hesitated, then said, Lauren's not who you think she is. I laughed bitterly. No kidding. She's been doing this for years, Alex, he continued. Find a guy, get close to him, bleed him dry, and then make him disappear. My stomach twisted. Disappear? Ryan's voice was grave. Derek Henshaw wasn't the first. I gripped the phone tighter. What do they want from me? You're the last loose end. The words settled over me like a death sentence. I had played this whole thing like I was in control, like I was getting revenge. But all along, I was the target. A noise outside made me freeze. A car engine. Then footsteps crunching through the snow. I moved quickly, shoving my laptop and the flash drive into my bag. My pulse thundered in my ears as I grabbed my gun from under the couch. A shadow moved past the window. I exhaled slowly. They were here. I crept toward the door, pressing my back against the wall beside it. The doorknob turned. Then bang. The door burst open. Two men stepped inside, both wearing dark coats, guns drawn. I didn't hesitate. I fired the first shot, hitting the man closest to me in the shoulder. He cursed, stumbling back. The second one turned toward me, but I was faster. I kicked the table over, sending it crashing into his legs, buying myself a split second. I bolted for the back door. Run. Get to the truck. Get the hell out. A gunshot rang out behind me, splintering the door frame as I shoved through it, the icy wind slamming into my face. I sprinted through the snow, my boots crunching with every desperate step. My truck was just ahead. Almost there. Then, a body slammed into me from behind. I hit the ground hard, snow exploding around me. A heavy weight pressed down on my back as a hand grabbed my wrist, twisting it painfully. My gun flew from my grip, landing somewhere in the snow. Stay down, a voice growled. I bucked against him, managing to roll just enough to throw my elbow into his ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening. I used the opening to shove him off and scrambled to my feet. I lunged for my gun. Another gunshot rang out. Pain exploded through my side. I collapsed, gasping, as fire spread through my ribs. The man I had shot earlier loomed over me, his pistol aimed at my head. You should have just let this go. I gritted my teeth against the pain. Yeah, not really my style. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then a shot came from behind him. His eyes widened. He staggered, then collapsed into the snow. I gasped for breath, clutching my side, as footsteps approached. Ryan. He stood over me, lowering his gun. His face was grim. Come on, he said, grabbing my arm and hauling me up. We need to get the hell out of here. I didn't argue. Blood soaked through my coat, but I forced myself forward, stumbling toward the truck. Ryan shoved me into the passenger seat, jumped into the driver's side, and floored it. The tires spun in the snow before catching traction, and we sped off into the night. I don't remember much after that. Pain. The blur of trees rushing past. Ryan's voice cursing under his breath. Then darkness. When I woke up, I was in a motel room. My shirt was gone, replaced with bandages wrapped tightly around my ribs. A dull ache throbbed through my body. Ryan sat in a chair across from me, watching. You're awake, he said. I swallowed, my throat dry. Where are we? Nowhere anyone will find us. I exhaled slowly. Lauren. Ryan's expression darkened. Gone. For now. I closed my eyes. For now. This wasn't over. I had thought revenge would be the end of this. But now, I knew the truth. Lauren had tried to destroy me. But I wasn't dead yet. And when she came back, because she would, I'd be ready. I didn't know how much time had passed before I could finally breathe without pain. Days blurred together. Pain, exhaustion, and the realization that I had barely survived. But despite everything, one thought burned inside me. I had to finish this. Ryan and I had been hiding in a small motel near the Canadian border. He had done everything to keep me from bleeding out, stitched up my wound, found painkillers. But most importantly, he had given me answers. Lauren hadn't just been cheating on me. She had planned to destroy me. She's still out there, Ryan said one evening, sitting across from me, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. His face was grim, tired, but focused. And if you think she's just going to disappear, you're wrong. I slowly sat up in bed, feeling the dull ache in my ribs. Where is she? Ryan exhaled smoke and shrugged. Gone. But not forever. She's done this before. She left a trail. I clenched my fists. I'm going to find her, I said. Ryan smirked. That's what I was hoping you'd say. 2 weeks passed. My body was healing, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. I couldn't forget her voice from the video. He doesn't suspect a thing. I heard those words over and over again, like a broken record. But now I knew who she really was. And I knew where to find her. She was hiding in a small hotel in Mexico. She must have thought I was dead or had given up. A stupid mistake. I arrived in the city at night, gripping the gun in my pocket, though I hoped I wouldn't have to use it. I knew that Lauren always loved luxury. Even when she was on the run, she couldn't resist expensive things. That's what gave her away. I entered the hotel and went up to the right floor. My heart beat steadily. No fear, no doubt, just cold determination. Her room door was slightly open. I pushed it and stepped inside. Lauren stood by the window, a glass of wine in her hand. Her back tensed as she realized it was me. Slowly, she turned around, her eyes full of terror. You're alive, she whispered. I closed the door behind me and stepped closer. Disappointed? She swallowed, setting the glass down. Alex, let's talk. I laughed. Now you want to talk? Her hands trembled. You don't understand. I had no choice. I took another step forward, trapping her in the corner. No choice. I hissed. You wanted me dead. You played me like a puppet. And now you're scared. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't want it to go this far. It wasn't just my decision. I leaned in closer. Then tell me, who else is involved? She shrank back, her face twisting in fear. If I tell you, they'll kill me. I pulled out my gun and pressed it against her forehead. If you don't tell me, you die right now. She gasped, tears streaming down her face. Okay, I'll tell you. Lauren broke. She spilled everything. The offshore accounts. The people who had helped her. The criminal schemes she had been a part of. She thought it would save her. But I didn't care. I called Ryan and told him everything. A few hours later, the police stormed the hotel room. Lauren screamed as they pinned her to the ground and handcuffed her. I stood there, watching her lose everything. This was the end. She got what she deserved. A month later, I sat in my house in Anchorage, feeling at peace for the first time in years. Ryan sent me a newspaper clipping. The scam of the decade. Criminal group arrested for fraud and murder. Lauren had been sentenced to life in prison. I smiled. The story was over. She couldn't hurt me anymore. I was finally free.